My son-in-law at 3 in the morning, rubbing something wet and shiny in the kitchen sink. My heart nearly stopped. My name is Betty Collins. I'm 68 years old, and I never thought that going downstairs for a glass of water would change everything I knew about the man my daughter married. We always think we know the people living under our roof, don't we? Especially family. But that night showed me that everyone carries secrets, even when we break bread together every day. I'd been living with my daughter Susan and her husband Rick for almost 2 years by then. After my Harold passed, our house felt too big just for me. They invited me to move in with them, and at first I didn't want to, you know? Always had that thing about not wanting to be a burden. But I finally agreed when the doctor said it wasn't good for me to live alone with my high blood pressure. It was a nice house in a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland. Nothing fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms and a small backyard where I grew my herbs and tended to my flowers. My room was upstairs, next to my teenage grandchildren's rooms, Michael, who's 17, and Jennifer, 15. Susan and Rick slept in the bedroom downstairs, near the living room. That January night, it was freezing cold. Cleveland winters cut right through to your bones. I'd gone to bed early after watching my shows, but woke up with a dry throat. I checked the clock on my nightstand. Exactly 3:12 in the morning. I got up slowly, put on my old robe, the one with purple flowers my sister gave me for Christmas 5 years ago, and slipped on my slippers. The house had that special kind of quiet that only people who've been awake in the middle of the night know. The kind of silence where you could almost hear dust settling. I made my way down the stairs carefully, trying not to make noise. Those old wooden steps were always creaking. The last thing I wanted was to wake everybody up just because I needed water. When I reached the bottom step, I heard a muffled sound coming from the kitchen. The soft running of water and a kind of scrubbing, like someone cleaning something with great effort. My heart jumped. Who could be in the kitchen at that hour? My first thought was an intruder, but I quickly dismissed it. Burglars don't stop to wash dishes, do they? I walked through the hallway that connected the living room to the kitchen, stepping lightly. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light inside. Not the ceiling light, more like the light coming from the street lamp outside the window. I pushed the door open with my fingertips, very slowly, and that's when I saw him. Rick. My son-in-law was there, his back to me, leaning over the sink. He was wearing only old pajama pants and a white t-shirt. His arms were moving in a strong, concentrated rhythm, as if he was scrubbing something vigorously. On the counter beside him were several open containers and scattered cloths, and in his hands he held something large, wet, and shiny, something that reflected the dim light coming through the window. I stood there watching the scene for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. Rick had always been a hard worker. A civil engineer, he left every morning at 7 in his suit and tie, returned around 7 in the evening, always with his black briefcase under his arm. A serious man, a man of few words, but kind. He'd never raised his voice at me or Susan, at least not that I'd seen. He was a good father, too, always helping with homework, taking the kids to their activities on weekends. Susan had fallen in love with him when they both worked at the same construction company, she in administration. They've been married for 15 years now, in a simple but beautiful ceremony at St. Michael's Church. My late Harold was still alive then, and he was the one who walked our daughter down the aisle. And now, there was my son-in-law, hiding in the kitchen in the middle of the night, doing something I couldn't quite understand. My mind started racing with 1,000 possibilities. Was he hiding something from my daughter? Had he broken something valuable and was trying to fix it before anyone noticed? Or was it something worse? You always hear those stories, don't you? About men leading double lives, hiding terrible secrets from their families. I'd seen so many cases like that on those afternoon shows that feature family tragedies. What if my son-in-law had some kind of addiction? What if it was something even more sinister? While these crazy ideas were running through my head, I accidentally stepped on a loose floorboard. The creak was like a gunshot in the silence of the night. Rick turned around with a start, eyes wide like a child caught doing something wrong. That's when I got a better look at what he had in his hands, something that gleamed and dripped a thick, clear liquid down onto the counter. His hands were covered with this liquid all the way up to his elbows. At first, I was paralyzed, not knowing what to say or do. "Mrs. Collins," he exclaimed, trying to hide the wet object with his body. His face turned red instantly, visible even in the dim light. "You startled me." I still hadn't found my voice. My heart was beating so hard I thought he could hear it. What was that thing in his hands? Why was he doing this in the dead of night while everyone was asleep? "What are you doing, Rick?" I finally managed to ask, my voice coming out softer and shakier than I intended. He swallowed hard, still trying to hide the object behind him. His eyes avoided mine, as if he was thinking up an excuse. "It's not what you think," he stammered, wiping his hand across his forehead and leaving a mark of that strange liquid. It was at that moment I realized my son-in-law had a secret, and I had just caught him in the act. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. "It's not what you think," Rick repeated, still trying to hide what was in his hands. I stood there in the doorway, feeling the cold ceramic floor through my slippers. This kitchen, which during the day was so cozy and full of life, seemed strange in the dead of night. It was a simple kitchen, but neat. Susan had always been proud of it. White cabinets, beige countertops, a wooden table with 6 chairs in the center. On the wall hung a rooster-shaped clock I'd given her for their first wedding anniversary. The fridge was covered with magnets and photos of the grandkids. Everything so normal during the day, but at that moment, under the faint light coming through the window, it seemed like the setting for a mystery. "I just came for water," I explained, pointing to the cabinet where the glasses were kept. "Didn't expect to find anyone here at this hour." Rick looked even more nervous. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, as if he couldn't decide whether to come toward me or stay where he was. The liquid on his hands was dripping onto the floor, forming small, shiny puddles. "I can get water for you, Mrs. Collins," he offered, but didn't move. He kept protecting whatever was behind him with his body. I took a deep breath. Since I'd come this far, I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't seen anything. I've never been one to beat around the bush. Harold always said I was too direct, sometimes too much so. "It's good to be honest, Betty, but we don't always need to say everything we're thinking," he used to remind me. But my old man wasn't here anymore, and I was too old to change my ways. "Rick, what are you hiding there? What are you doing in the middle of the night?" He looked down at his bare feet, then back at me. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. "Mrs. Collins, I didn't want anyone to know yet. Not even Susan knows." Those words fell like a stone in my stomach. What could be so serious that not even my own daughter knew? In my head, I started imagining terrible things. Maybe he was sick, with some serious disease, and was taking medicine in secret? Or worse, what if it was something like drugs? I'd heard cases of family men who hid addictions for years. "Rick, we're family. If there's a problem, we solve it together," I said, trying to sound calmer than I actually felt. That's when he took a deep breath, like someone making a difficult decision, and slowly moved away from the counter. What I saw confused me. It was a large, shining object covered with some kind of clear gel that was dripping. It took me a few seconds to recognize what it was. "But that's my mother's crystal vase," I exclaimed, finally recognizing the piece that had been stored in the living room cabinet for years. It was an old baccarat crystal vase, very fine indeed, that my mother had received as a wedding gift back in the 40s. A tall vase, intricately crafted, that reflected light in thousands of tiny fragments when the sun hit it. After my mother passed, it came to me, but I never used it much. Thought it was too beautiful, something to be kept safe. When I moved in with Susan, I brought it with me, along with other family keepsakes. "What are you doing with my mother's vase? Why are you putting this stuff on it?" Rick finally managed to look me in the eyes. He looked like a boy caught misbehaving, not a man of almost 50. "It's a special product, Mrs. Collins, for restoring antique crystal." I frowned, still not understanding. Restoring? But the vase wasn't broken. No, but it had lost its shine, developed age spots. This gel needs to be applied in layers over hours to penetrate the tiny cracks in the crystal and restore its original brilliance. I looked more carefully at the counter and realized it wasn't just the vase there. There were other, smaller pieces, a silver picture frame that I recognized as belonging to Rick's family, a small carved wooden box that looked antique, and some objects I had never seen before. The kitchen, which had always been the heart of the home, now looked like an improvised workshop. On the light yellow walls, the grocery store calendars and the embroidered dish towels that Susan collected contrasted with this unusual scene. The familiar smell of coffee and spices had been replaced by a light chemical scent, not unpleasant, but different. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked, approaching slowly, my curiosity now greater than my initial shock. Rick ran a hand through his graying hair at the temples, leaving a bit more of that shiny gel in it. "About 3 months," he admitted. "Started with small pieces. Discovered I have a knack for it." 3 months. The same time he had changed his work schedule. Before, he always left and returned at the same times. In recent months, sometimes he came home later, saying he had meetings. Other times he left earlier, claiming appointments with clients. Susan never suspected anything, always trusted her husband. I had never seen reason to doubt him either. And why in the middle of the night? Why in secret? He shrugged, a gesture that didn't match the situation. "During the day, I don't have time, and I didn't want to tell anyone before I was sure." "Sure of what, Rick?" He hesitated for a moment, looking at the gleaming vase, then at his hands covered with gel. "That I could do it right. That I could be good at this." There was something in his voice, a mixture of pride and uncertainty, that reminded me of Harold when he tried to fix things around the house. My husband was never very handy with manual work, but he tried. Sometimes he spent hours trying to fix a dripping faucet or a loose cabinet door. Most times he ended up calling a professional, but he always tried first. The kitchen fell silent for a moment. Outside, I heard the sound of a car passing by, probably some worker heading to the early morning shift or returning after a long day. Cleveland's east side had changed a lot since I was young. What used to be a neighborhood of small factories and family businesses was now filled with big box stores and chain restaurants. But some things don't change, like the sounds of the early morning in a big city. "May I see?" I asked, pointing to the vase. Rick seemed relieved by my reaction. He nodded and moved a bit further from the counter, giving me space. I approached slowly and looked at the vase carefully. Even in the dim light, I could see it was different. The crystal shone in a way I couldn't remember seeing before, even when it was new. The small figures etched in the glass, flowers and leaves in delicate patterns, seemed almost to leap from the surface. "It's looking beautiful," I admitted, surprised. Rick smiled for the first time since I'd entered the kitchen. A small, shy smile, but genuine. "Still needs the final layer," he explained. "That's why I was doing it now. The product needs to dry for at least 4 hours between applications." I nodded, beginning to understand the situation, but still feeling there was more to this story, something that Rick wasn't telling me. "And why can't anyone know? Why not even Susan knows about this?" The smile disappeared from his face, replaced by an expression I couldn't quite decipher. His eyes avoided mine again. "It's complicated, Mrs. Collins," he answered softly. "There's more I need to explain." "It's complicated, Mrs. Collins," Rick repeated, wiping his hands on a nearby rag. The gel left shiny stains on the old cloth. "I think we need to talk." He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and gestured to me. "Please, have a seat." That made me more worried. When someone asks you to sit down before telling you something, it's usually not good news. That's how it was when the doctor called me in to talk about Harold. How it was when Susan said she was moving to the other side of town. I sat down slowly in the chair, feeling the weight of my 68 years on my back. Rick sat across from me. The faint light coming through the window cast shadows on his face, making his wrinkles look deeper. I hadn't noticed how tired my son-in-law had been looking lately. Mrs. Collins, what I'm going to tell you now, I ask that it stays just between us, for now. I pressed my lips together, not liking where this conversation was heading. Rick, if it's something that's going to hurt my daughter— No, it's nothing like that, he hurried to say, shaking his head. I love Susan. I would never do anything to hurt her. That's exactly why I haven't told her yet. I crossed my arms, waiting. The rooster clock on the wall showed it was almost 3:30 in the morning. The second hand ticked away, the only sound in the kitchen besides our breathing. 3 months ago, Rick began, I was called into the director's office at the construction company. He swallowed hard. I thought it was about the new shopping mall project, you know, the one I was coordinating. I nodded. I remembered Susan talking about that project, saying how excited Rick was about it. But that wasn't it, he continued. The director told me the company was having financial difficulties, that they needed to cut costs, and that I was being let go. My eyes widened. Fired? But you've worked there for over 10 years. 12 years, he corrected with a sad smile. Yeah, seems that doesn't matter much these days. They preferred to keep the younger engineers, who earn less. I sat in silence, processing this information. Rick had been fired from his job 3 months ago, and nobody at home knew? How had he hidden this for so long? But what about your schedule? The meetings? You leave every morning and come back every evening. Rick rubbed his face, looking even more exhausted. I leave the house and go looking for work. I drop off resumes, go to interviews. But it's not easy, Mrs. Collins. Not at my age. They look at me and see a 48-year-old man nearing retirement. They prefer to hire the young folks fresh out of college. I nodded, understanding well what he was saying. The world was getting harder and harder for older people. I'd seen it happen to several friends. But why not tell Susan? She's your wife. You don't understand, he said, lowering his gaze. Susan is so proud of me, of her successful engineer husband. How could I come home and say I was thrown away like yesterday's news? That now I'm just another middle-aged, unemployed guy? The shame in his voice caught me by surprise. Rick had always seemed so confident, so strong. Seeing him like this, almost broken, gave me a pang in my heart. And there's more, he continued. Michael is in his senior year, wants to go to med school. Jennifer just started at that private high school. There's the house payment, health insurance, the bills. Don't you have savings? I asked. We did, he sighed. We used a good chunk last year when we renovated the house. The rest is disappearing fast. I sat looking at the man in front of me. My daughter's husband, my grandchildren's father. A good man I'd known for 15 years. And only now did I realize I didn't know everything about him. And this business of restoring things? I asked, pointing to the vase and the other pieces on the counter. Rick's face brightened a bit. That started by accident, he explained. Remember that old clock in the living room that stopped working? One day, while everyone was out, I decided to open it up and see if I could fix it. I've always liked detailed, precise work. In engineering, we deal with big things, buildings, structures, but my professors always said I had good hands for fine work. He looked at his own hands, still with traces of the shining gel. I managed to fix the clock. Then it was Michael's old radio, Jennifer's broken necklace. I realized I had a talent for it. One day, I was at a coffee shop near a job interview, and I overheard 2 men at the next table talking about restoring antique pieces. One of them was complaining that he couldn't find someone reliable to restore a family crystal set. Rick smiled, remembering. I gathered my courage and joined their conversation. Showed them photos of the clock and other things I'd fixed. The man, Mr. Peterson, looked skeptical at first, but ended up giving me a small piece to test. A crystal salt cellar with a broken edge. I restored it so well he could hardly believe it. I looked again at the pieces on the counter, now understanding where they had come from. Are they all his? This Mr. Peterson's? Some are. Others belong to people he referred me to. Friends, relatives, wealthy folks who own valuable antiques and pay well to have them restored. Rick paused, as if deciding whether he should continue. After a few seconds, he went on. Over the last 2 months, I've managed to earn some money doing this. Not much, but enough to help with expenses without dipping too much into our savings. I do the work at night when everyone's asleep. During the day, I keep looking for a job. I was impressed by his story. My son-in-law, whom I thought I knew so well, had a secret life as an antique restorer in the early hours of the morning. It was like something out of a novel. And my mother's vase? Why are you restoring it? Rick smiled, a lighter smile now. It's for our 15th wedding anniversary next month. I wanted to give Susan something special, but I can't afford expensive gifts right now. So I thought of restoring your mother's vase, which she's always admired. It was stored in that box on top of the living room cabinet, a bit dusty, without the shine it should have. I remembered how beautiful that vase was when my mother had it, how it gleamed when she placed it on the table for special occasions. Indeed, over time, it had lost much of its splendor. And this product? Where did you get it? Bought it from a specialized supplier Mr. Peterson introduced me to. It's imported, expensive, but worth every penny. It needs to be applied in several layers with hours of drying time between them. That's why I'm doing it at night. As he spoke, I kept looking at the vase. It really was turning out beautifully. Rick had talent, that was undeniable. Mrs. Collins, he said, leaning forward in his chair. I know I shouldn't be hiding this from Susan, but please understand, I've always been the provider for this family. My father was like that, my grandfather too. A man who can't support his family. How could I face everyone? How could I look her in the eyes and say I failed? You didn't fail, Rick, I said firmly. The company failed you. After so many years of dedication. He shook his head, not looking very convinced. Anyway, I was planning to tell everyone after our anniversary. I thought by then I would have found a new job, or maybe this restoration business would be more established. I just wanted to have something positive to show when I told the truth. The weight of that secret seemed almost visible on his shoulders. For a moment I thought of Harold and how proud he was too, how he hated showing weakness or asking for help. Men, always thinking they need to carry the world on their shoulders alone. And now? I asked. What will you do now that I've discovered your secret? It's complicated, Mrs. Collins, Rick repeated, wiping his hands on a nearby rag. The gel left shiny stains on the old cloth. I think we need to talk. He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and gestured to me. Please, have a seat. That made me more worried. When someone asks you to sit down before telling you something, it's usually not good news. That's how it was when the doctor called me in to talk about Harold, how it was when Susan said she was moving to the other side of town. I sat down slowly in the chair, feeling the weight of my 68 years on my back. Rick sat across from me. The faint light coming through the window cast shadows on his face, making his wrinkles look deeper. I hadn't noticed how tired my son-in-law had been looking lately. Mrs. Collins, what I'm going to tell you now, I ask that it stays just between us, for now. I pressed my lips together, not liking where this conversation was heading. Rick, if it's something that's going to hurt my daughter, no, it's nothing like that, he hurried to say, shaking his head. I love Susan. I would never do anything to hurt her. That's exactly why I haven't told her yet. I crossed my arms, waiting. The rooster clock on the wall showed it was almost 3:30 in the morning. The second hand ticked away, the only sound in the kitchen besides our breathing. 3 months ago, Rick began, I was called into the director's office at the construction company. He swallowed hard. I thought it was about the new shopping mall project, you know? The one I was coordinating. I nodded. I remembered Susan talking about that project, saying how excited Rick was about it. But that wasn't it, he continued. The director told me the company was having financial difficulties, that they needed to cut costs, and that I was being let go. My eyes widened. Fired? But you've worked there for over 10 years. 12 years, he corrected with a sad smile. Yeah, seems that doesn't matter much these days. They preferred to keep the younger engineers who earn less. I sat in silence, processing this information. Rick had been fired from his job 3 months ago, and nobody at home knew? How had he hidden this for so long? But what about your schedule, the meetings? You leave every morning and come back every evening. Rick rubbed his face, looking even more exhausted. I leave the house and go looking for work. I drop off resumes, go to interviews. But it's not easy, Mrs. Collins. Not at my age. They look at me and see a 48-year-old man nearing retirement. They prefer to hire the young folks fresh out of college. I nodded, understanding well what he was saying. The world was getting harder and harder for older people. I'd seen it happen to several friends. But why not tell Susan? She's your wife. You don't understand, he said, lowering his gaze. Susan is so proud of me, of her successful engineer husband. How could I come home and say I was thrown away like yesterday's newspaper, that now I'm just another middle-aged unemployed guy? The shame in his voice caught me by surprise. Rick had always seemed so confident, so strong. Seeing him like this, almost broken, gave me a pang in my heart. And there's more, he continued. Michael is in his senior year, wants to go to med school. Jennifer just started at that private high school. There's the mortgage, health insurance, the bills. Don't you have savings? I asked. We did, he sighed. We used a good chunk last year when we renovated the house. The rest is disappearing fast. I sat looking at the man in front of me. My daughter's husband, my grandchildren's father, a good man I'd known for 15 years. And only now did I realize I didn't know everything about him. And this business of restoring things? I asked, pointing to the vase and the other pieces on the counter. Rick's face brightened a bit. That started by accident, he explained. Remember that old grandfather clock in the living room that stopped working? One day, while everyone was out, I decided to open it up and see if I could fix it. I've always liked detailed, precise work. In engineering, we deal with big things, buildings, structures. But my professors always said I had good hands for fine work. He looked at his own hands, still with traces of the shining gel. I managed to fix the clock. Then it was Michael's old radio, Jennifer's broken necklace. I realized I had a talent for it. One day, I was at a coffee shop near a job interview, and I overheard 2 men at the next table talking about restoring antique pieces. One of them was complaining that he couldn't find someone reliable to restore a family crystal set. Rick smiled, remembering. I gathered my courage and joined their conversation, showed them photos of the clock and other things I'd fixed. The man, Mr. Peterson, looked skeptical at first, but ended up giving me a small piece to test, a crystal salt cellar with a broken edge. I restored it so well he could hardly believe it. I looked again at the pieces on the counter, now understanding where they had come from. Are they all his, this Mr. Peterson's? Some are. Others belong to people he referred me to. Friends, relatives, wealthy folks who own valuable antiques and pay well to have them restored. Rick paused, as if deciding whether he should continue. After a few seconds, he went on. Over the last 2 months, I've managed to earn some money doing this. Not much, but enough to help with expenses without dipping too much into our savings. I do the work at night, when everyone's asleep. During the day, I keep looking for a job. I was impressed by his story. My son-in-law, whom I thought I knew so well, had a secret life as an antique restorer in the early hours of the morning. It was like something out of a novel. And my mother's vase? Why are you restoring it? Rick smiled, a lighter smile now. It's for our 15th wedding anniversary next month. I wanted to give Susan something special, but I can't afford expensive gifts right now. So I thought of restoring your mother's vase, which she's always admired. It was stored in that box on top of the living room cabinet, a bit dusty, without the shine it should have. I remembered how beautiful that vase was when my mother had it, how it gleamed when she placed it on the table for special occasions. Indeed, over time, it had lost much of its splendor. And this product? Where did you get it? Bought it from a specialized supplier Mr. Peterson introduced me to. It's imported, expensive, but worth every penny. It needs to be applied in several layers, with hours of drying time between them. That's why I'm doing it at night. As he spoke, I kept looking at the vase. It really was turning out beautifully. Rick had talent, that was undeniable. Mrs. Collins, he said, leaning forward in his chair. I know I shouldn't be hiding this from Susan, but please understand, I've always been the provider for this family. My father was like that. My grandfather, too. A man who can't support his family. How could I face everyone? How could I look her in the eyes and say I failed? You didn't fail, Rick, I said firmly. The company failed you. After so many years of dedication. He shook his head, not looking very convinced. Anyway, I was planning to tell everyone after our anniversary. I thought by then I would have found a new job. Or maybe this restoration business would be more established. I just wanted to have something positive to show when I told the truth. The weight of that secret seemed almost visible on his shoulders. For a moment, I thought of Harold, and how proud he was too, how he hated showing weakness or asking for help. Men, always thinking they need to carry the world on their shoulders alone. And now, I asked, what will you do now that I've discovered your secret? Rick took a deep breath and looked at me with eyes full of worry. Honestly, Mrs. Collins, I don't know. Are you going to tell Susan? I felt the weight of that question. I never liked keeping things from my daughter. Since she was little, I always taught her to be honest, to tell everything to me and her father. And now I was in a situation where I had to decide whether to keep a secret of this magnitude or not. Rick, I don't like lying to my daughter, I said, adjusting my robe over my knees. But I also don't like meddling in other people's business. This is between you and her. He ran his hand through his hair, nervous. The light coming through the window showed the gray at his temples, something I hadn't noticed before. My son-in-law was aging, just like all of us. I know I should have told her from the beginning, he admitted. Each day that passes makes it harder. Every morning I leave the house pretending I'm going to work. Every night I come back with made-up stories about my day at the office. I've lost count of how many lies I've told. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past 4 in the morning. The day would soon begin to dawn. How long do you think you can continue like this? I asked. Rick shook his head, discouraged. Our savings are running out, Mrs. Collins. At most another month, maybe less. This restoration work, he pointed to the vase and other pieces, is helping, but it's not enough yet. At that moment, something occurred to me. Something I hadn't thought of before. Rick, how are you paying the bills? The mortgage? The kids' school? From our savings, like I said. I took everything from our account and put it in our joint checking. Susan never really looks at the statements. She trusts me to handle that. I thought about what he was telling me. Rick had kept everything running normally for 3 months, without anyone suspecting anything. That showed how hard he was trying to protect his family, even if in the wrong way. And if you don't find a new job soon, what happens when the money runs out completely? His expression grew even more worried. It was a question that clearly tormented him. I have hope for this restoration work, he said, looking at the pieces on the counter. Mr. Peterson says he knows a lot of wealthy people with antiques at home, people who would pay well for quality service. But I need time for this to grow, to get more clients. I sat in silence, thinking. Meanwhile, Rick carefully picked up the vase and began applying another layer of that special gel, with precise and delicate movements. It was amazing to see how those large, strong hands, used to construction work and building plans, could be so gentle with something so fragile. "You enjoy doing this, don't you?" I asked, watching him work. For the first time that night, I saw a genuine smile on his face. "I love it, Mrs. Collins. There's something, I don't know, almost magical about taking a lifeless piece, worn by time, and restoring its original shine. It's like giving things a second chance." As he spoke, his fingers glided over the crystal with a tenderness that reminded me of how my mother used to clean this same vase so many years ago. She too had careful hands that knew the value of old things. "You know," he continued, "when I was a child, my grandmother had a display cabinet full of antique pieces, crystals, porcelains, small sculptures. She wouldn't let anyone touch them, said they were too fragile. But sometimes when I sat quietly, she would call me over and show me each piece, tell me the story of where it came from, who had given it to her. I think that's where this love for old things comes from." There was something moving in his voice when he talked about this. It seemed like he was discovering a part of himself that had been dormant for a long time. "Why didn't you follow this path before, instead of engineering?" Rick chuckled softly. "My father would never have allowed it. Real men build buildings. They don't play around with delicate little things," he used to say. "So I became an engineer, like he wanted." That made me think about how sometimes we spend our whole lives following what others expect of us, without stopping to think about what we really enjoy doing. "And now, if you could choose?" He was silent for a moment, as if he had never considered this possibility. "Now? I guess it's too late to change, isn't it? I'm almost 50, 2 kids to raise, a mortgage to pay." "It's never too late," I replied, remembering my own life. I had started doing crafts at 60 after Harold died. It was something small, just to keep myself busy, but it gave me a joy I hadn't expected to find at that stage of life. Rick finished applying the gel to the vase and carefully placed it in a corner of the counter where it could dry undisturbed. Then he turned to me with a serious expression. "Mrs. Collins, you caught me in a difficult situation tonight, but in a way, it's been good to talk to someone about it. Carrying this secret alone was getting too heavy." I felt a pang of compassion for him. It couldn't have been easy going through all this in silence, trying to keep up appearances. "I understand, son. Secrets have a way of growing inside us, don't they? They get heavier and heavier until we can barely move with them." Suddenly, we heard a noise from upstairs. Footsteps. Someone had woken up. We exchanged worried glances. "Must be Michael," Rick whispered. "He sometimes gets up early to study before school." Quickly, he began to put away the tools and products, hiding everything inside an old toolbox I had never seen before. I got up to help, carefully placing the vase inside a high cabinet where it would be safe and out of sight. As we did this, Rick looked at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Mrs. Collins, give me a little more time. I promise I'll tell Susan everything soon, but I'd like to do it my way. After our anniversary, when the vase is finished." Before I could answer, the footsteps got closer, coming down the stairs. Quickly, Rick turned on the faucet and began washing his hands, trying to remove the gel residue. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, as if that's what I had come to the kitchen for. Michael appeared at the door, looking sleepy with his hair all messed up. He looked at us in surprise. "Grandma? Dad? What are you guys doing up at this hour?" "Just getting some water, sweetheart," I replied, showing him the glass. "Your old grandma doesn't sleep through the night like you young folks." Rick dried his hands on a towel, trying to appear natural. And I got up to check if I'd left some work documents in the kitchen. Thought I'd brought them to review after dinner. Michael gave his father that attentive look he has. For a moment, I thought he was going to ask more questions. My grandson had always been observant, ever since he was little, but he just shrugged. "Okay, I came down for a snack. Can't study on an empty stomach." While Michael opened the refrigerator, Rick and I exchanged glances. He seemed relieved that we'd escaped the interrogation, but I knew this situation couldn't continue much longer. Secrets like this have a way of coming out when you least expect it. When Michael sat at the table with a sandwich and a glass of milk, Rick said he was going back to bed. He gave me one last meaningful look before leaving the kitchen. I stayed there with my grandson, pretending it was just another normal early morning. But inside my head, everything was different. I had just discovered a side of my son-in-law I didn't know, and now I was carrying a secret that could change my family's life. "Everything okay, Grandma?" Michael asked, looking at me curiously. "You seem worried." I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, honey. Just thinking about life, old people stuff." But as I said it, I knew nothing was fine, and that, from this night on, things in our house would never be the same. And if you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. The days after that night passed slowly, as if time had stretched like bread dough. Each morning, I watched Rick leave with his briefcase, giving Susan a kiss, pretending he was going to a job that no longer existed. Each night, I heard his footsteps in the kitchen after everyone was asleep, working on his restorations. It was a huge burden keeping that secret. I felt torn between loyalty to my son-in-law, who had confided in me, and love for my daughter, who deserved to know the truth. Several times I picked up the phone to call my old friend Martha, who had always been my advisor in difficult times, but I gave up. This wasn't my secret to tell. A week after our conversation in the kitchen, things started to get even more complicated. I was helping Susan fold laundry when she commented, worried, "Mom, I think something strange is going on with Rick." My heart jumped. "Strange how, honey?" She lowered her voice, even though there was no one else in the house at that time. Michael and Jennifer were at school, Rick at work. "He's been acting different, tired, distracted. The other day, I found him looking at our bank statement with such a worried face. When I asked what was wrong, he brushed it off, said it was just a bill he'd forgotten to pay." I folded a towel carefully, trying to hide my nervousness. "Men always worry about money, dear. Your father was the same way." "It's not just that," Susan continued, biting her lip. "There's more. Last week I called the construction company to talk to him, needed to know if we could invite his boss to our anniversary dinner. The secretary said he wasn't there, that he'd left early for a meeting. But at night, when I asked about this meeting, he gave me a strange look, said there was no meeting. I felt a chill in my stomach. The lies were starting to tangle, just as Rick had feared. "Maybe the secretary got confused," I suggested, without much conviction. "Maybe. But there are other things. I found a business card from someone I'd never heard of, some Arthur Peterson, antique dealer. When I asked, Rick got nervous, put the card away quickly, said it was a client of the construction company." Peterson, the man who had given Rick his first restoration pieces. He had mentioned the name in our conversation. "And there's the smell," Susan continued. "Rick sometimes comes home with a strange smell on his hands, on his clothes. It's not a woman's perfume or anything like that," she hastened to add, seeing my expression. "It's more like a chemical product, you know? Something like that. The restoration gel. Even after washing his hands well, the smell must linger." "Honey, do you think that Rick is hiding something?" Susan put down the shirt she was folding and sat on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were watery. "I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I think crazy things. What if he's sick, with some serious illness, and doesn't want to tell me so I won't worry?" That possibility hadn't occurred to me. I sat beside her and took her hands. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" "Last week I woke up in the middle of the night and he wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen, going through what looked like a medicine box. When he saw me, he closed it quickly. Said it was just for a headache, but he seemed startled, like I'd caught him doing something wrong. Probably not medicine, but his restoration products. Still, Susan's concern was genuine, and it broke my heart. "Have you tried talking to him about this?" She wiped away a tear. "I've tried, but he avoids the subject. says everything's fine, that I'm imagining things, but I know my husband, Mom, 15 years of marriage, I can tell when something's wrong. I took a deep breath. It was getting harder and harder to keep that secret. Rick needed to tell the truth, and soon. But I had promised to give him time, to let him resolve this his own way. Honey, men sometimes keep things bottled up. Your father was the same way. He'd worry about everything, but only tell me when he couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. But what should I do, Mom? Wait, push harder. I'm afraid it's something serious. Before I could answer, the phone rang. Susan answered. I watched her face change as she listened. When she hung up, she was pale. That was from the bank. They said there's a problem with our credit card. The bill was due 3 days ago and hasn't been paid. I felt another knot in my stomach. Things were starting to fall apart. Rick always pays everything on time, Susan continued, confused. He's so organized with the bills. Must have been an oversight, I said, trying to calm her down. With so much work at the construction company, I'm going to call him, Susan decided, picking up her cell phone. This isn't normal. She dialed the number, waited. 1, 2, 3 rings. Nothing. Voicemail, she said, hanging up. She tried again, with the same result. He must be in a meeting, I commented, trying to sound natural. In reality, I knew that Rick was probably at a job interview, or perhaps dropping off resumes, places where he couldn't answer the phone. Susan looked even more worried. I'm going to the construction company, she suddenly decided. I need to talk to him in person. My heart raced. If she went there, she would discover everything in the worst possible way. Honey, calm down. You don't need to do that. He'll call back soon. No, Mom. Something very strange is happening. I'm going to get to the bottom of this now. She was already grabbing her purse, determined. I needed to do something, and fast. Susan, I called out with the firmest voice I could muster. Sit here a minute. Before you go rushing out, there's something you need to know. My daughter stopped, looking at me suspiciously. What is it, Mom? Do you know something? I felt the weight of that decision. I had promised Rick I wouldn't tell, but now, seeing my daughter's desperation, I couldn't keep the secret any longer. I do know some things, I admitted. But it's not what you're thinking. It's not illness, or another woman, nothing like that. Susan came back to sit on the bed, her eyes fixed on me. Then what is it, Mom? For God's sake, tell me! I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Your husband. Rick is having problems, honey. Financial problems. What do you mean? What kind of problems? It was time for the truth. There was no going back. He lost his job, Susan, 3 months ago. My daughter's face transformed. First confusion, then shock, then a painful understanding as the pieces fell into place in her mind. Lost his job, but he leaves every day for work, comes back talking about the office. What do you mean? He's been pretending, honey. He leaves the house and goes looking for work, dropping off resumes. He hasn't had the courage to tell anyone. Susan stood up, agitated, pacing back and forth in the bedroom. No, it can't be. Why would he do this? Why would he hide something like this from me? I'm his wife. Shame, honey. Fear of disappointing you, the kids. He's always been the provider for the family. You know how proud men can be about these things. Susan stopped pacing and stared at me. Her eyes now showed more than worry. There was a mixture of hurt and anger. How do you know all this? He told you, but not me? It was the question I had been dreading. I explained about that night in the kitchen, about how I had found Rick with the crystal vase, about our conversation. I left out some details, like the restoration being a new business he was trying to start. I thought it would be better if he told that part himself. When I finished, Susan was crying. It wasn't a loud cry. It was silent, the kind that's more painful to see. 3 months, she repeated, as if she couldn't believe it. 3 months of lies, every single day. He was going to tell you, honey, after your anniversary, when the vase was finished. The vase? She wiped her tears angrily. What vase? What does a vase matter now? He lied to me for 3 whole months, Mom. I realized I had said too much. The vase was supposed to be a surprise. It's a gift he was preparing for you, something special. But Susan wasn't listening anymore. She picked up her phone again and typed a quick message. "What are you doing?" I asked, worried. "I'm sending Rick a message, telling him I know everything and that he needs to come home now so we can talk." I swallowed hard. This wasn't how I had imagined things would happen. Rick must be desperate now, receiving such a message without knowing exactly what Susan had discovered. "Honey, try to stay calm. He must be suffering a lot with this too." Susan looked at me with hard eyes, something I rarely saw in her expression. "You knew, Mom. You knew for over a week and didn't tell me. Why?" The accusation in her voice cut me deeply. "He asked me for time, honey. I promised I wouldn't tell, and your promise to him was worth more than your loyalty to me?" That left me speechless. It was an impossible question to answer. How could I choose between my son-in-law's trust and my daughter's well-being? There was no right answer. Susan's phone vibrated with a response. She looked at the message and then at me, with an expression that mixed triumph and pain. "He's coming home now, says we can talk, and that he'll explain everything." It was at that moment I realized our family was about to face a storm, and I, unwittingly, had helped unleash it. Waiting for Rick that afternoon was one of the longest waits of my life. Susan sat in the living room, staring at nothing, like a statue. I tried to stay with her, but the atmosphere was so heavy that I ended up going to the kitchen to make some coffee. When you're nervous, doing something with your hands helps calm you down. While I stirred the coffee on the stove, 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. Maybe I'd done the wrong thing. Maybe I should have let Rick tell the truth his way, in his own time. But seeing my daughter so distressed, I couldn't keep that secret any longer. The coffee started to rise, and I took it off the heat. At that exact moment, I heard the sound of a key in the lock. Rick had arrived. I turned off the stove and stood there, unsure whether I should go to the living room or stay in the kitchen. I decided to stay. That first conversation needed to be just between the two of them. From the kitchen, I could hear what was happening in the living room, even without seeing. First the sound of the door opening, then heavy footsteps, and finally Rick's voice, low and tense. "Susan, I can explain." "Explain what, exactly?" My daughter's voice was too calm, that dangerous way women get when they're deeply hurt. "That you lost your job 3 months ago and didn't tell me? That you've been leaving every day pretending to go to work? That our financial situation is a disaster and I knew nothing about it?" Silence for a few seconds. Then Rick spoke, his voice heavy with defeat. "All of it. I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid of your reaction, afraid of disappointing you." "Ma, disappointing me?" Susan's voice rose a notch. "What disappoints me is the lie, Rick. How could you hide something so serious from me for so long? I'm your wife." I know. His voice sounded choked, as if he was on the verge of tears. I'd never heard my son-in-law like that before. "It was a mistake, I admit it, but each day that passed made it harder to tell you. I thought, I'll tell her tomorrow. Tomorrow will be easier." But it never was. I heard the sound of someone moving on the sofa, probably Susan moving away from him. And my mother? How did she find out before me? I felt my stomach drop. It was what I feared. My daughter feeling betrayed twice, by her husband and by me. She caught me by surprise, that night in the kitchen, with the vase. "What's this about a vase?" Mom mentioned something, but I didn't understand. Rick took a deep breath, so loud I could hear it from the kitchen. "It's a different part of the story. Can I show you?" Silence. I imagine Susan must have nodded, because I heard Rick's footsteps moving away, then returning. I risked a peek through the kitchen door. I saw Rick placing something wrapped in a cloth on the coffee table. Carefully, he unwrapped it, revealing my mother's crystal vase. Even from my position, I could see how different the vase looked. It shone intensely, as if it were new, every detail of the crystal perfectly visible. It was as if it had gone back in time, to when my mother received it, decades ago. "What is this?" Susan asked, her voice a little less harsh. "It's your grandmother's vase," Rick explained. "I was restoring it to give you as a present for our 15th wedding anniversary. Your mother caught me working on it in the middle of the night." "You restored this?" "Yes." Rick's voice took on a different tone, almost proud. "I discovered I have a talent for this. Started with small repairs around the house, then moved on to more complicated pieces. One day, by chance, I met an antique dealer, Mr. Peterson. He started giving me restoration jobs. I went back into the kitchen, not wanting to be seen spying, but I continued to listen to their conversation. "Rick, this doesn't explain why you hid that you lost your job. Why didn't you tell me right away?" "At first, I thought it would be temporary. I thought I'd find another job quickly, that I wouldn't even need to worry you about it. But the weeks kept passing, and the interviews weren't going anywhere." "Because of your age?" Susan asked, surprising both me and probably Rick with her insight. "Yes," he admitted after a pause. "No one says it directly, of course. That would be discrimination. But you can tell from the looks, from the way they say, 'We'll analyze your resume.' The market wants young people, fresh out of college, who will accept lower salaries." I heard a deep sigh from Susan. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Rick, do you think I wouldn't understand that? Do you think I would judge you for being laid off?" "It's not just that," he said, his voice low. "It's pride, Susan. I've always been the provider for this family. My father was like that. My grandfather, too. A man who can't support his own family. It's hard to accept, but that idea is so outdated. We're a team. I work too. I contribute too." I know, but that's how I was raised. And there's more. We're using our savings to keep everything running, but they're running out. The money that was for Michael's college, for that trip you've always wanted to take. There was a long silence. I risked another peek. They were sitting on the sofa now, closer to each other. Susan was looking at the crystal vase, thoughtful. "How much time do we have left? Financially speaking?" she finally asked. "A month, maybe less," Rick answered honestly. "The last school payment is due next week, and I don't know how we're going to pay it. That's why the credit card was late." "Yes. I'm trying to stretch the money as far as possible. Using the card for essentials, paying the minimum. But it's getting harder and harder." Susan looked at her husband with an expression I couldn't quite see from my position, but her voice came out stronger when she spoke. "And this restoration work? Is it something that could actually work out?" I saw Rick straighten up on the sofa, as if that question had sparked something in him. "I think so. I've been getting good feedback. Mr. Peterson says my work is excellent, that there are few restorers with a good hand for antique crystals and porcelains. He's been referring me to acquaintances, people with money who value this kind of service." "How much have you been making from this?" "Not much yet. $1,000, $2,000 a month, depending on the pieces. But Mr. Peterson says I could earn much more when I have my own workshop, when I can work on more pieces at the same time." Susan was silent for a moment, then got up and walked to the window. I was tense, not knowing what she was thinking. "Why do you work in the middle of the night?" she suddenly asked. "Because it's the only time available," Rick explained. "I don't have an adequate space. I use the kitchen because the light is good and there's the sink to wash the pieces. I do it when everyone is asleep so I don't disturb anyone. And also, well, so no one would discover it before I was ready to tell." Susan turned to face him, arms crossed. "You really enjoy this, don't you? I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it." Rick seemed surprised by her observation. "I do, yes, very much. It's completely different from engineering. There I dealt with big things, buildings, structures. Here it's the opposite, delicate, meticulous work that requires patience and sensitivity. I think I've finally found something I truly love doing." Then something happened that I didn't expect. Susan walked over to Rick, took his hands, and examined them carefully. Strong engineer's hands, now also restorer's hands. "You should have told me," she said, but without the anger from before. "We could have faced this together from the beginning." "I know," Rick lowered his head. "It was the biggest mistake of my life, hiding this from you. But I was so afraid of failing as a husband, as a father." Susan lifted his face with her hand, making him look into her eyes. "You didn't fail, Rick. The company failed you. After so many years of dedication." They were almost the same words I had said to him that night. Seeing my daughter react this way, with understanding despite the hurt, filled my heart with pride. "What are we going to do now?" Rick asked, his voice full of uncertainty. It was at that moment that I decided to enter the living room. They both looked at me, surprised, as if they had forgotten I was in the house. "I think I have an idea," I said, walking towards them. "But first, let's have some coffee. This conversation is far from over, and we need to be wide awake to make important decisions." Susan looked at me with an expression that mixed resentment and gratitude. She was still hurt that I had kept the secret, but at the same time seemed relieved that I was there, ready to help. "What idea, Mom?" she asked, as I set the coffee pot on the center table, along with 3 cups. I looked at the crystal vase shining intensely under the afternoon light. Then I looked at Rick, who seemed exhausted, but also somehow lighter now that the truth was out. "Remember that basement workshop your father used?" I asked, pouring the coffee. "It's been empty for years. I think it would be a perfect place for a restoration studio, don't you think?" Rick's eyes widened at the suggestion, while a small smile began to form on Susan's lips. At that moment, I felt that our family could survive this storm and perhaps even come out stronger on the other side. The next day, we all woke up with a different energy in the house. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted, even though the problems were still there. For the first time in 3 months, Rick didn't pretend to go to work. Instead, we had breakfast together, the 3 of us, and then went to look at the basement. It was a large space at the back of the house with a separate entrance from the backyard. Harold, my late husband, had made it his carpentry workshop after he retired. It was his special place where he spent hours making small pieces of furniture, little boxes, wooden toys for the grandkids. After he passed, I closed up the place and rarely went in there. It hurt too much to see his tools, to smell the wood scent that still hung in the air. When we opened the door, a cloud of dust rose up. Cobwebs had taken over the corners, and a gray layer covered everything. Even so, we could see the potential of the place. There was a sink in one corner, wide workbenches along the walls, shelves all around. And best of all, a large window that let in plenty of natural light. "Needs a good cleaning," I commented, running my finger along one of the benches and making a face at the dust that came off. "But the structure is solid. Harold always liked things well made." Rick walked around the space with a gleam in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. He examined every corner, mentally measuring the spaces, already imagining how he could use it all. "There are enough electrical outlets," he observed, "and this main workbench is perfect for working on larger pieces. Here could be the cleaning area near the sink. There, with the natural light, would be great for more delicate work." Susan watched her husband with an expression that was hard to read. There was still hurt there, of course. A betrayal that size isn't overcome overnight, even if it wasn't with another woman. But there was also something new there, a kind of curiosity, maybe even admiration at seeing this side of her husband that she didn't know. "You really understand this stuff, don't you?" she asked, while Rick enthusiastically examined an old lighting system that Harold had installed above the main workbench. "I've learned quite a bit," he replied, not hiding his enthusiasm. "Each material requires different techniques. Crystal is different from porcelain, which is different from silver or wood. Lighting is crucial. It needs to be strong enough to see the tiniest details, but can't heat up certain pieces too much." He continued explaining, using terms I'd never heard before, talking about special products, restoration techniques, specific tools. I realized that during those 3 months of secret work in the middle of the night, Rick hadn't just found a way to make money. He'd discovered a true passion. "We'll need to clean all this up," I said, interrupting his technical chatter. "It'll be a lot of work." "We can start today," Rick suggested, excited. "I'll buy cleaning supplies, brushes." "With what money?" Susan asked, and Rick's smile faded a little. The reality of their financial problems came back like a bucket of cold water. For a moment, we had forgotten they were almost out of money, with bills to pay and a maxed-out credit card. That's when I remembered something. "Come with me," I said, leaving the basement and heading toward the house. They followed me, confused. I went straight to my bedroom, went to the dresser and opened my sock drawer. There at the back, rolled up in a thick wool sock that I never use in Ohio, was a small wooden box. "What's this, Mom?" Susan asked, as I sat on the bed with the little box in my lap. "This, my dear, is what your grandmother used to call mattress money." I opened the box, revealing several bundles of bills, some yellowed with age, carefully organized by denomination. "My God, Mom! Where did all this come from?" Susan exclaimed, her eyes wide. "A little here, a little there," I answered with a small smile. "Your father always gave me a little allowance, ever since we got married. I saved a bit every month. Later, when I started selling my crafts, I saved that too. It's more than 50 years of saving." Rick stared at the box as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Mrs. Collins, this must be a lot of money." "It's a good amount, yes. I've never counted the total, but it must be around 30,000, maybe more." $30,000, Susan almost shouted. "You kept all this in your sock drawer?" I shrugged. Never trusted banks much. "Your grandmother used to say, 'Money is like love. You need to feel it in your heart, not on paper.' She used to hide money in the pages of her Bible." Rick seemed speechless. He kept looking from the money to me and back to the money. "Mrs. Collins, we can't accept this. It's your security, your retirement." "And what am I going to do with this money? Take it with me to the grave," I replied, in a tone that left no room for discussion. "I have my little government pension, which isn't much but covers what I need. This money was saved for an emergency. And this," I pointed at the two of them, "is an emergency." Susan sat down next to me on the bed and hugged me tight, with tears in her eyes. "Mom, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "Family is for this. Besides, I'm not giving the money away for free. I want to be a partner in the business." Rick, who was still standing, looked at me surprised. "Partner?" "That's right. The money goes in as initial investment. We'll set up the restoration workshop together. You contribute the technical knowledge, I contribute the capital, and I can help too. I have good hands for delicate work. I've been sewing and embroidering all my life." "Mom, are you serious?" Susan asked, wiping away her tears. "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, placing the box in Rick's hands. "Let's make this business work." In the days that followed, we threw ourselves head first into transforming the basement. We bought cleaning supplies, paint, new lighting systems. Rick asked for advice from Mr. Peterson, the antique dealer, on how to set up a professional workshop. Mr. Peterson was so excited about the idea that he came to visit us in person and gave several valuable suggestions. Cleaning was the hardest part. Years of dust don't come off easily. Rick, Susan, and I worked together for a whole week. Even the kids helped after we told them the whole truth. At first, Michael and Jennifer were shocked to learn that their father had lost his job and hidden it for so long. But when they saw his enthusiasm for the new project, and especially when they understood that this could save the family's finances, they jumped right in. Michael, my oldest grandson, revealed a surprising talent for organization. He was the one who created a cataloging system for the pieces that came in for restoration. Jennifer, always skilled with computers, offered to create a simple website and social media profiles to promote her father's work. With the money I had saved, we were able to buy professional equipment, magnifying glasses, special tools for delicate work, imported products for restoring different materials. Rick read everything he could about the subject, watched videos online, exchanged information with other restorers that Mr. Peterson introduced him to. One afternoon, while we were painting the workshop walls a luminous white, Rick suddenly stopped, paintbrush in the air, and looked at me and Susan. "You know something? I think losing that job was the best thing that ever happened to me." Susan raised her eyebrows, surprised. "How so?" "I was never really happy as an engineer," he confessed. "I did it because my father wanted me to, because it was a respected profession, because it paid well. But I never felt this excitement, this desire to learn more, to improve, to see the results of my work." He looked around at the workshop that was taking shape. "Here, each piece I restore gives me a satisfaction I never felt building buildings. It's like giving life back to something that was forgotten, devalued. I feel like I'm creating beauty, preserving history." In that moment, looking at my son-in-law's illuminated face, I understood that we were witnessing not just the transformation of an old basement into a restoration workshop, but the transformation of a man who was finally finding his true path. The first official commission came 2 weeks after we finished setting up the workshop. It was a set of 6 antique baccarat crystal glasses that belonged to a friend of Mr. Peterson's family. The man paid in advance, trusting the recommendation. Rick worked on those glasses like I'd never seen him work on anything. Each movement precise, each application of product calculated to the millimeter. I helped as I could, mainly with the initial cleaning of the pieces and organization. Susan, who had taken time off work to help with the transition, handled the administrative part, noted the estimates, made receipts, controlled expenses. When the glasses were finished, shining like new but maintaining their antique charm, the client was so impressed that he immediately commissioned the restoration of a set of Chinese porcelain that had been in his family for generations. "It's starting," Rick said that night as we looked at the first legitimate income from the new business. It wasn't much, $3,000 for the glasses, but it represented the beginning of something new, something honest, something with a future. "What if it works out?" Susan asked, still cautious. "What if it doesn't?" Rick took her hand and smiled. "If it works out, we'll have built something of our own, something we love doing. If it doesn't, well, at least we tried together as a family, and that alone is worth it." I looked at the two of them, feeling that something important had changed in our family dynamic. Rick's lie had been terrible, but from the crisis had come a new possibility, a new beginning. And I, who thought that at 68 years old I had lived everything there was to live, was embarking on a new adventure. That night, before going to bed, I looked out my bedroom window to the backyard, where the light in the workshop was still on. Rick was working on a new piece. I thought of Harold and how happy he would be to see his old workshop coming to life again with a new purpose. Life is funny that way. When one door closes, sometimes it's just so we can notice an open window we hadn't seen before. He didn't just have one son, he had 2, maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. The first month of the restoration workshop was more difficult than we expected. Even with all our enthusiasm, reality has a way of testing our strength. Orders weren't coming in as frequently as we needed. The money, even with my savings, started to get tight again. Bills kept coming. The kids' school, mortgage payments, groceries, medications. One afternoon, I found Rick sitting in the workshop, looking at an antique opaline piece he had just restored. A delicate lamp with flower designs. It was perfect, the milky glass shining as if it had been made yesterday, not over 100 years ago. But his face showed worry. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting on a stool beside him. "This lamp has been here for 3 weeks, Mrs. Collins," he said, running his hand gently over the surface of the piece. 3 weeks of careful work, expensive products, hours and hours of dedication. Do you know how much I'll get for it? $2,000. "That's not a small amount," I commented. "It's not enough," he corrected. "If I do the math, considering the time, materials, expertise, it barely covers the costs. And while I was working on it, I could have done 3 or 4 smaller pieces that would have given a better return." I realized my son-in-law was learning a lesson that every small business owner learns sooner or later. What we love to do isn't always what makes the most money. "And what do you plan to do?" I asked. He sighed. "I need to be more selective with the commissions, focus on pieces that give a better financial return, less time, more results." That conversation made me realize that the dream was facing reality. Rick loved restoring difficult, challenging pieces that required all his skill and patience. But those weren't always the most profitable. At home, problems appeared too. The children, after their initial enthusiasm for their father's new business, began to feel the effects of the changes. Michael, who had always dreamed of going to medical school, had to hear that he might need to try for a state university or choose a less expensive course. Jennifer couldn't go on the exchange program she had been wanting so badly. Small luxuries that had been normal before, eating out on weekends, buying new clothes frequently, were cut. Susan went back to work after her time off, but asked for reduced hours so she could help more at the workshop. This meant less salary, right when we needed it most. "I'm thinking of selling the car," Rick announced one night during dinner. "What?" Susan almost dropped her fork. "But how will you deliver pieces, pick up materials?" "I can use public transportation or rent a car when needed," he argued. "The money from the sale would give us breathing room for a few more months. Pay the kids' school until the end of the year at least." The tension was palpable at the table. I realized that despite all our effort, we were on a financial tightrope. The business was growing, but not fast enough to cover all our needs. That's when Michael, my smart grandson, had an idea that would change everything. "Dad, why don't you teach restoration classes?" he suggested between bites. "Like a course for people who have antique pieces at home and want to learn how to care for them." Rick looked at his son as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Classes? I've never taught in my life." "But you know how to do it," Jennifer joined the conversation. "And there are lots of wealthy people who collect antiques but don't know how to properly care for them. Emily's mom has a bunch of her grandmother's silver pieces that are always tarnishing." "We could charge per student, have small classes," Susan added, getting excited about the idea. "We could use the workshop on weekends when you don't have as much regular work." I watched my son-in-law consider the idea, twirling his fork in his plate absent-mindedly. "I don't know if I have the patience to teach," he confessed. "What if people don't like it? If they think it's not worth the money?" "There's only one way to find out," I said, joining the conversation. "By trying." That's how the Conservation and Minor Restoration course for collectors was born, as Rick decided to call it. With Jennifer's help, we created a simple flyer announcing a weekend course with a price we considered fair, $1,000 per person, materials included, for a class of maximum 5 students. Mr. Peterson, always willing to help, distributed the flyers among his wealthier clients. Susan sent them to colleagues she knew. Jennifer promoted it on the social media profiles she had created for the workshop. To our surprise, within 3 days, all 5 spots were filled. Even more surprising, there was a waiting list. "I can't believe it," Rick said, looking at the list of registrations. "There are people willing to pay $1,000 to learn from me?" "You're good at what you do," I replied proudly. People recognize that. The first course was a huge success. Rick, who was afraid he wouldn't know how to teach, discovered he had a talent for it. He was patient, explained well, knew how to demonstrate techniques in a way everyone understood. The students left delighted, saying they had learned more in 2 days than in months of trying on their own. "You were right, Mrs. Collins," Rick told me afterward as we cleaned up the workshop. "Sometimes we only discover what we're capable of when we try." From then on, the courses became a regular part of the business. Every month, one weekend was dedicated to teaching. The classes always filled up, often with the same students returning to learn more advanced techniques. The money from the courses helped balance the finances while the restoration work grew more slowly. But not everything was smooth sailing. A wealthy client, owner of an important porcelain collection, made a large order for Rick. They were 12 rare plates from the 18th century, valued at a lot of money. He worked on those pieces for weeks, using the most advanced techniques he knew. When he delivered them, the client looked at them disdainfully. "This isn't what I wanted," she said, pointing to small imperfections that were part of the piece's history, not flaws in the restoration. "I wanted them to look like new, with no marks at all." "But ma'am," Rick tried to explain, "ethical restoration preserves the object's history. Eliminating all marks of time would devalue the pieces." "I don't care what's ethical," she retorted with arrogance. "I paid for them to be perfect." It was a terrible situation. The woman refused to pay the agreed amount, saying the work was poorly done. Rick, who had invested time and expensive materials, was devastated. "Maybe I'm not as good as I thought," he said that night, sitting in the backyard, looking at the stars. Susan sat next to him and took his hand. "You're excellent at what you do. That woman doesn't understand anything about true restoration." The next day, to our surprise, Mr. Peterson showed up at our house. He had heard about the incident with the client and was furious. "That Mrs. Livingston has always been impossible," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "She's already ruined the work of other restorers with her absurd demands. Actually, I came here to make a proposal." The proposal was tempting. Mr. Peterson was retiring and wanted someone to take over part of the restoration work he received at his store. Someone he could trust. Someone like Rick. "I can't pay a salary," he explained, "but I can refer clients, recommend your work, leave some of my pieces for you to restore and sell at the store, with commission. It would be a partnership." It was as if a door had opened when we were cornered in a dead end. This association with Mr. Peterson, a respected name in the antiques market, would give Rick's business the credibility it still lacked. "Mr. Peterson, I don't know what to say," Rick stammered, emotional. "Say yes," the old man smiled. "I'm getting too old to deal with certain pieces. My hands aren't as steady anymore. I need someone with talent and ethics. You have both." That night, we all sat in the living room for a family meeting. Rick laid out the financial situation honestly, something he always did now, having learned his lesson about secrets. "We're improving, but we're not secure yet," he explained. "The courses help. The partnership with Mr. Peterson will be excellent, but we need more. Maybe we should sell the car, change the kids' schools." That's when Michael, my grandson, now almost 18 years old, raised his hand as if he were in a classroom. "Dad, Mom, I've made a decision," he said, his voice firm despite his age. "I'm going to try for Ohio State. It's public, no tuition, and I'll work part-time to help out at home." Jennifer also spoke up. "I can give math tutoring. There are a bunch of kids in the neighborhood who need help. That could bring in a little extra money, too." I looked at the scene with a heavy heart. My grandchildren were growing up, facing reality earlier than they should, perhaps, but they were growing up strong, with solid values, learning that family helps each other in difficult times. Rick seemed speechless. His eyes shimmered with emotion. "We'll make it," Susan said, squeezing her husband's hand. "Together. And who knows, in a few years, this workshop in the basement might become a real store, with your name on the door." For the first time in months, I saw a truly relaxed smile on my son-in-law's face. It was no longer the smile of someone pretending everything was fine, nor a tense smile of someone trying to be optimistic despite fear. It was the smile of a man who, even while facing difficulties, had found his path. And I, observing all this, felt that perhaps my savings, kept in a sock drawer for so many years, had found their true purpose. It wasn't just for a medical emergency or for my own comfort in old age. It was to help my family build something new when the old collapsed. 6 months had passed since that early morning when I found Rick in the kitchen with the crystal vase. 6 months of hard work, worries, learning, and small victories. The New Life Restorations Workshop, a name Jennifer suggested and we all loved, was starting to establish itself for real. On a sunny Saturday morning, I sat in the backyard drinking my coffee, watching the activity in the workshop. It was a course day, and Rick was welcoming students with a confidence he didn't have at the beginning. He was no longer the unemployed engineer, hiding his failure from his family. He was a respected restorer, a teacher admired for his knowledge. Susan approached and sat in the chair next to me with her own cup of coffee. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" she asked, following my gaze to the workshop. "About how things change," I replied. 6 months ago, we were all desperate, thinking the world was ending. Now look. Susan smiled. "We're not rich yet, but at least we don't need to sell the car anymore." It was true. The financial situation had improved considerably. We weren't swimming in money, but the bills were paid on time, savings were slowly being rebuilt, and most importantly, the family had found a new balance. "I've never seen Rick so happy," Susan commented. "Even in the good times at the construction company, he never came home so excited, so full of stories to tell about his work." I watched my son-in-law explaining to a group of 5 students how to identify the type of crystal by the sound it makes when tapped lightly. His gestures were precise, his voice confident. He truly was a transformed man. "And Michael?" I asked. "Still set on Ohio State?" "Still is, studying harder than ever. His guidance counselor says he has a good chance. That boy has a good head on his shoulders." Michael had surprised us all with his determination. Instead of being upset that he couldn't go to a private college as originally planned, he embraced the challenge of getting into one of the most competitive public universities in the state. He studied in the morning at school, in the afternoon at the free prep course where he'd gotten a scholarship, and still helped his father in the workshop on weekends, also learning the restoration craft. "And Jennifer with her tutoring?" Susan laughed. "That girl is making more money than me. She has 6 regular students, charges $50 an hour. She even bought a new cell phone with her own money, can you believe it? Said she didn't want to ask us for it now." I felt immense pride in my grandchildren. In difficulties, they showed character and strength that they might not have discovered if everything had continued to be easy. "And you, my dear? How are you feeling about all this?" Susan grew thoughtful for a moment. "It was difficult at first. Rick's lie hurt me deeply. There were moments when I thought our marriage wouldn't survive. And what changed? I realized that, despite his mistake, Rick did what he did because he loves us, because he wanted to protect the family. It was the wrong way, of course, but the intention was good." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "And then, seeing him rebuild everything, struggle so hard, find something he truly loves doing, I think I fell in love with him all over again." I smiled, understanding well what she meant. Sometimes long relationships need these renewals, these moments of rediscovery. "And look," she continued, pointing discreetly to the workshop. "Doesn't my husband look handsome in a work apron?" We both laughed, like we hadn't in a long time. It was good to see my daughter happy again, without that constant cloud of worry hanging over her. The workshop had become the heart of the home. It was no longer the secret place where Rick worked, hidden in the early morning hours, but a space of life, creation, meetings. Besides the regular weekend courses, we now had a group that met on Wednesday nights for collective restoration sessions. People who brought their own pieces and worked together, exchanging techniques and stories. One of these people was Martha Winters, a 75-year-old lady with an impressive collection of antique dolls. She appeared one day, brought by Mr. Peterson, wanting to restore a French porcelain doll from the 19th century. "My husband never let me touch the dolls," she told us, while Rick carefully examined the piece. "He said I would ruin them, that they were too valuable for amateurs." Rick understood the feeling perfectly. My father was like that too. Wouldn't let anyone touch his tools. After I became a widow, the dolls started to deteriorate and I didn't know what to do, Mrs. Winters continued. Then I heard about your courses. Mrs. Winters became a constant presence at the workshop. She quickly learned porcelain restoration techniques and soon was helping other people. For a lady who had spent her life being discouraged from touching her own collections, it was liberating. One day, she arrived with an idea that would change the course of our business even more. "Rick," she said, placing her purse on the workbench. I have a group of collector friends. They all have the same problem. Antique pieces that need care and no one reliable to do the service. I was thinking, what if we held an exhibition of your work at my house with afternoon tea? I'd invite all of them. That's how the first restoration tea was born, as we ended up calling it. In Mrs. Winter's imposing house in Shaker Heights, Rick set up a small exhibition with before and after shots of his most impressive restorations. My mother's crystal vase had a place of honor, of course, along with photos of the restoration process. 25 ladies from Cleveland's high society attended. Between fancy cookies and fine teas, Rick talked about his work, answered questions, demonstrated some basic techniques. By the end of the afternoon, he had received commissions that would guarantee 3 months of work and a full class for the advanced course. "See that?" I said to Rick on the way home. "Who would have imagined 6 months ago that you would be giving lectures to the cream of society?" He laughed, shaking his head. "If someone had told me, I wouldn't have believed it. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it, Mrs. Collins?" "And what turns?" I agreed. The success of the restoration tea was so great that it became a monthly event, each time at a different collector's home. The network of contacts grew, and with it, the opportunities. One afternoon, while I was helping Rick catalog some newly arrived pieces, I received a message from Susan saying she needed to show us something urgently. She arrived at the workshop with an envelope in her hand and a mysterious smile on her face. "What is it, honey?" I asked, curious. "Remember that restoration contest Rick entered with that music box?" she asked, waving the envelope. Rick, who was focused on a delicate porcelain, looked up. "I remember. The one from the American Antique Restorers Association. What about it?" "The results are in," Susan said, opening the envelope slowly, building the suspense. It was an important contest that Rick had decided to enter more as an experience than with hope of winning. The competition was fierce, with restorers from all over the country, many with decades of experience. Susan finally pulled the letter from the envelope and read aloud. "We are pleased to inform you that Mr. Richard Johnson has been selected as a finalist in the Mechanism Restoration category of the 15th National Restoration Award." Rick nearly dropped the porcelain he was holding. "Finalist? Me?" "Not just a finalist," Susan continued, almost jumping with joy. "Third place winner. There's a certificate, a medal, everything." That award, more than the money that came with it, which wasn't much, represented official recognition. Rick, the engineer who just 6 months ago had been working secretly in the kitchen in the middle of the night, was now an award-winning restorer. That night, we had a small family celebration. We opened a bottle of wine that had been saved for special occasions and toasted to the workshop's success. "Who should we toast to first?" asked Michael, holding his glass of soda, since he wasn't old enough to drink yet. "To new beginnings," Susan suggested. "To the courage to change," Jennifer added. "To family," said Rick, looking at each of us with emotion in his eyes. That stayed united even in the most difficult moments. I raised my glass, feeling a deep emotion in my chest. "To the crystal vase," I said, making everyone look at me, confused. That revealed secrets in the night, but also revealed hidden talents and new paths. Everyone smiled, understanding. That vase, my mother's inheritance, had been much more than an object to be restored. It had been the catalyst for a complete transformation in our family. "And to you, Mrs. Collins," Rick added, inclining his glass in my direction, "who believed in me when I had already given up on myself." I felt tears in my eyes, moved by the recognition. At 68 years old, I too had found a new purpose, a new joy in helping to build this dream. "To the future," I toasted, looking at my grandchildren, who represented the continuation of all this. "May it be as bright as a well-restored crystal." The glasses clinked, sealing not just a celebration, but a promise that no matter how dark the night may seem, there's always a new morning waiting to shine. A year had passed since that early morning when I found Rick in the kitchen. a full year of transformations, learning, and new beginnings. The New Life Restorations Workshop had become a solid business, with loyal customers and recognition in the market. Today, sitting in my favorite spot in the backyard, I observe the activity in the workshop. Rick is receiving an important client, an antique collector who came from Columbus specifically to see his work. Through the open window, I can see my son-in-law showing restored pieces with that gleam of pride in his eyes that has now become so familiar. How life takes its turns. I still remember the frightened man I found that night, with gel-covered hands, trying to hide not just the vase, but all his pain and shame. It's funny how objects sometimes carry more than their own histories. They carry ours too. My mother's crystal vase wasn't just a beautiful object passed down from generation to generation. It became the symbol of our family's reconstruction. Susan appears at the door of the house, walking toward me with 2 cups of coffee. She sits down next to me on the bench and hands me one of the cups. "What are you thinking about, Mom? You look like you're miles away." "I'm thinking about how things change," I answer, blowing on the hot coffee. "About how we never know what to expect from life." Susan smiles. Our relationship also changed over this past year. It grew deeper, more honest. After that day when I told her about Rick's secret, we had our own difficult conversations. She was hurt with me for a while, feeling I had taken his side. But with time, we understood there were no sides. We were all a family trying to survive a storm. "You know what I learned from all this, honey?" I say, looking at the workshop where Rick is now showing a polishing technique to the client. "That sometimes what seems like a tragedy can just be the beginning of something new. That endings are just curves in the road." "What do you mean, Mom?" "When your father died, I thought my life was over, that I'd never find joy or purpose again. Then you brought me to live here, and I found a new way to be happy, being a grandmother, helping around the house. When Rick lost his job, he also thought it was the end, that he had failed as a man, as a provider, and look at him now." Rick is smiling in the workshop, passionately explaining every detail of an antique piece. His eyes shine in a way they never did when he talked about the construction company. "He was born for this," Susan says, with a touch of admiration in her voice. "I've never seen my husband so fulfilled. It's because he's finally doing what he loves, not what he thinks he should do. Most people go their whole lives without that chance." And it's true. How many people do I know who lived year after year in jobs they hated, relationships that didn't work, situations that made them unhappy, just because they were afraid to change, afraid of what others would think, afraid of failing, afraid of the unknown. "Life is made of breaks and repairs," I continue thoughtfully. "Just like the pieces your husband restores. We break, we get hurt, we lose our shine. But with care, time, and the right tools, we can restore ourselves. And sometimes we even look more beautiful afterward, with our scars and marks, because they tell our story." Susan takes my wrinkled hand and squeezes it gently. "That was beautiful, Mom." In the workshop, I see Rick showing the client my mother's crystal vase. He always keeps it on display as a showcase piece of his work. The client picks up the vase, examines it against the light, clearly impressed. "That vase existed when I was a little girl," I comment. "My mother received it as a wedding gift back in the 40s. It's passed through so many hands, so many homes, so many stories. And now it's here, shining again, starting a new chapter. Just like us," Susan concludes. "Exactly, honey. Just like us." Michael and Jennifer appear in the backyard, returning from school. My grandchildren have also changed this year. They've matured, become more responsible, more united as a family. Difficulties teach things that comfort never could. "Grandma, that shipment of products you ordered arrived," Michael announces, showing a package. "Now I have my own corner in the workshop too." At 69 years old, I rediscovered my talent for crafts, especially restoring antique textiles, lace, embroidery, tapestries. Rick and I make a good team. It's never too late to learn something new, I say, getting up to receive the package, or to start over. And that may be the biggest lesson I learned in this intense year, that life isn't a straight line, but a circle of endings and beginnings, of losses and discoveries. That no matter our age, we can always reinvent ourselves, discover new talents, new loves, new purposes. Like my mother's crystal vase, we all hold beauty inside us, even when we're scratched by time, stained by disappointments, cracked by losses. The art is in allowing someone, or ourselves, to restore us with patience and love, returning our original shine, but keeping the marks that tell our story. I look at my family gathered in the backyard, my daughter, my son-in-law, my grandchildren, and feel a deep gratitude for life with all its surprises, its unexpected turns, its challenges. It took a crisis to show us our own strength, our capacity for adaptation, our resilience. As the old saying goes, God writes straight with crooked lines. Sometimes it's in the darkest early mornings that we find the brightest treasures. I survived this crisis, and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. And that was my story. Now I want to know, where are you listening from? Leave in the comments the name of your city. A warm hug from this grandma, who learned that life always has something new to teach us, no matter how many times the sun has risen and set.